Could Turkey's economic woes bring down a president sometimes referred to as Teflon Tayipp for his ability to deflect crises and scandal? President Recep Tayipp Erdogan is doing all he can to repress political opposition and stifle critical media. But skyrocketing inflation, a plunging currency, and unorthodox economic measures are provoking doubt even amongst his supporters. Both at home and abroad, he stands increasingly isolated, despite his quest for new allies after repeatedly snubbing old ones. Today we ask, one-man rule, can Turkey survive Erdogan? Hello and welcome to The Point. It's a pleasure to introduce our guests. Christian Hanelt is Senior Expert for Europe, Neighborhood and the Middle East at the Bertelsmann Foundation. And his thought is Erdogan is weakened, but the Ukraine crisis and the huge number of refugees it has taken in means that Turkey remains a key player. And it's a pleasure to welcome Bülent Mumay. He's an independent correspondent for Turkish and German media, including Deutsche Welle, mostly based in Istanbul. And he says Erdogan will do anything to stay in power, exploiting domestic and international crises. But now he's losing his touch because of the economic situation. And it's great to have with us Sinem Adar. She is an expert on Middle East and Turkey, working with the Berlin-based think tank Stiftung Wissenschaft und Politik, or SWP. Her opinion, it's hard to say how this might play out, but real change is looking increasingly likely. Bülent, tell us a little bit from your experience also in Istanbul and environments, what you're seeing right now in Turkey. How is this economic crisis affecting people's daily lives?
It affects a lot. Like when you go out in Istanbul traffic, you see less cars because of the gas prices. People are less using their cars, and especially when we have the energy costs are getting higher and higher. Erdogan came to power in 2002 after an economic crisis to survive the low and the middle classes, and now he is losing his support from that classes. So it's getting hard for him nowadays because of the economy.
Sinem, Istanbul's mayor, who is a contender to succeed Erdogan in next year's elections, he says that the economic crisis is now a political crisis. Now, I know in your opening statement you say it's hard to predict, but you talk about the possibility of real change. What would that look like? What's the scenario that would take Turkey there?
That's a good question, but that's also a difficult question. I guess one of the scenarios would be the elections that are planned to take place in 2023, both the presidential elections and the parliamentary elections. And given that the vote shares of both the AKP, the ruling government, and its junior partner, the Ultra-Nationalist Party, as well as the approval ratings for President Erdogan have been in steep decline since September 2021, together with the economic crisis. But also what seems to be kind of like a weakening elite incoherency in the regime, I think contribute to or are all signs that a change might be likely.
And we want to dig a little bit deeper on that incoherency. Christian, your opening statement said that Erdogan is weakened. This is a president who once looked nearly invincible, who really had the vast majority of the Turkish people behind him. Is he so weakened that, in fact, he really might fall from power?
A part of his political success with most of the electorates, that is a flourishing economy. But if there is no flourishing economy, as Bülent explained to us, then he is under pressure. And the consequences are also that this has a consequence to his foreign policy. Yeah, he's changing alliances. Yeah, he is approaching Israel, the United Arab Emirates, and Egypt, with whom he was at odds for years, in order to take part in the gas exploration in the Eastern Mediterranean. And secondly, it's in the strong wish of the US administration and the Europeans that Turkey stays in line with NATO in the confronting conflict with Russia, especially to help the West in Afghanistan and in Ukraine.
So we're going to talk a little bit later about whether that foreign policy actually can save him. But let's dig deeper, first of all, on the roots of an economic crisis that has taken a promising emerging economy to the verge of collapse. Soaring prices for everyday necessities are shaking the faith of even Erdogan's staunchest fans.
Vegetables, milk, bread, prices are exploding in Turkey. The corona pandemic and rising energy costs, as in other areas of the world, are not the only factors. The lira continues to plummet. Inflation is rising sharply. This woman says she walked for 2 hours to find affordable bread. She thinks inflation is at 100%. President Recep Erdogan wants to implement controversial measures. Again and again, he urges the central bank to keep interest rates low, though interest rate hikes are considered an effective means of combating inflation. Erdogan recently dismissed the head of the Statistics Authority, alleging he misrepresented the extent of the crisis. Meanwhile, Erdogan continues to make promises. We are now determined, he says, to break the neck of inflation, which we have reduced to 6% before and lowered back to single digits as soon as possible. Can this crisis cost Erdogan his office?
Bülent, some observers say that Erdogan's enthusiasm for slashing interest rates actually derives from his Muslim faith. He's known to be very religious, and of course, Islam does have a prohibition on the taking of interest. But would he really risk economic collapse for the sake of religion?
Well, I don't think that Erdogan is acting or behaving by the rules of the religion. Erdogan, they name Erdogan, they label Erdogan as an Islamist. Erdogan is not an Islamist. Erdogan is an autocratic leader who wants to stay in power for a long time. So he uses everything. One day he wakes up and he says, I'm keeping interest because of Islam. And next day he says, I'm doing it to enlarge the Turkish economy. So that's not Islam is not the reason. That's not the rules of Islam to use them in the economy. What he wants to do is having small interest rates, try to grow the economy with cheap money, with cheap loans and with cheap credits. That's the only way he knows. But with his local and international politics, it's not easy to have new investments in Turkish economy, and we can't improve our economy with that rules. It's not about Islam. It's his that's his way. Stay in power as an autocrat.
So, Sinem, Erdogan obviously is breaking with economic orthodoxy by continually lowering interest rates. But could there be method in this madness? Might he, in fact, get an economic turnaround? As we just said, Bülent says he claims to have a strategy.
Maybe a tactic. He claims to have, and maybe he has. And I personally think that it has a lot to do with the fact that he needs to navigate a very limited space among different economic elites. And that is mainly between the kind of the Istanbul business class and the business class that have been flourishing in the last 25 to 30 years in Turkey. Be it, for instance, the Muslim Businessmen's Association or a couple of other associations that have been really flourishing under the rule of the current government. And one claim that these groups have been actually putting on the government was to keep interest rates low. So I think by choosing to do that, he's in a way appealing to the demands coming from these groups. But one, I think, indication that it is getting really difficult to maneuver these competing demands coming from different business elites is how quickly he has been shifting economic policies. Because if you remember, late 2021, we actually have heard Turkey shifting into kind of like sort of orthodox economic policies. A reform package was announced and so on. Only a year after, it was kind of like 180 degrees turn. So I think that's a sign that actually that economic crisis, going back to your previous question, that economic crisis is also a political crisis because like many kind of navigating that space is becoming really difficult.
Very quick follow-up question. When you talk about economic elites and their interests, are you suggesting there's also a corruption element to this economic policy?
Of course. course. Because, I mean, obviously popular support is important, but I think one should really keep in mind that this government has created its own elites in the last 2 decades. To remain in power, not only the popular support is enough, but you really need to kind of continue maintaining the support of the elites as well. So I think that's really, that is built on crony capitalism, corruption, and so on, yes.
Christian, Erdogan himself claims that exports are surging and a cheaper currency could, in theory, promote both exports and tourism. Watching Turkish relations with other countries, do you think that's going to happen?
He is really, his economic policy, which Sinem was describing, is so much depending on a continuous and high inflow of euros and dollars into the Turkish economy. Yeah, because imports are much, much higher than exports. So he has really asked also Turkish communities in Europe to put their euros into the Turkish central bank. And the low interest rates are so much important, building on what Sinem said, because the construction industry, the elite of businessmen who are dominating the construction industry, this is very close with Erdogan. And they need low interest rates. Yeah? And so this is what this risky economic policy was talking around, and what also says that he is depending on relations with other countries from whom he profit that they bring their dollars into the Turkish central bank. For example, the rich countries in the Gulf, Qatar, since years has been investing money into Turkey in order to keep it also politically on the line in their Middle East policy. And now he has been asking the competitor of Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, to invest in Turkey. Yeah? And now the Emirates are going to invest in Turkey. And the United States, they are criticizing, rightly like the Europeans, the non-status of rule of law, the backlash on democracy and rule of law. But at the same time, they do not want to have an economic collapse of Turkey to keep them strongly because of its geostrategic position in the current crises.
We are going to come back to foreign direct investment in Turkey, but let me just briefly ask you this: this volatile economic policy, one thing one day, another thing the next. Is that really going to attract the kind of investment that Turkey needs?
It's risky because I don't think that the majority of Turkish of Turks who are living in Europe are giving their euros to a risky economic policy in Turkey. For them as well, rule of law is important. Yeah, and we have Melinda, we have such a strong economic interdependency and economic interaction between Europe and Turkey, so that the rule of law-based economy is getting more and more important. So Europe is really now forced, to do something that rule of law is going back into economic relations with Turkey and our trade relations.
Meanwhile, Bülent, it doesn't exactly look like rule of law is about to be strengthened any time soon. Erdogan has been dismissing not only leading central bank officials, but also judges, other academic, the rectors of universities. And, in fact, people have expressed criticism of him online, are also finding themselves served with arrest warrants. Do you see this situation now essentially turning into an even more autocratic regime going forward?
It will. I mean, we just have 1 year to the elections, to the official date of the elections. So in that last year, especially while we are having an economic crisis, he will use his power much more harshly. And I'm sure that, it's always his tool to increase the polarization in the country. He will do that. He will put much more pressure on media. He will put much more pressure on civil society because he doesn't want to leave the office in next year, because he knows that losing the office will not just be the losing the office. He will lose much more things. He knows that corruption that Sinem mentioned before is a huge problem for him. And you mentioned a couple of businessmen are having a lot of money. They earned a lot of money in Turkey who were supporting Erdogan. He gave them billions of dollars, billions of euros. Why? To support his political issues. Like he's giving contracts to a businessman, and then he asks that businessman, go and buy a media for me and support me. So he gave our tax to that people. So he knows that if he loses the elections, he will have to pay for that. So that's why at that year, he will be much more harsher. He won't let any new opposition on the streets or on social media.
Sinem, amongst the people who have been arrested is a leading arms dealer who actually had acted as a whistleblower to call attention to the kind of cronyism that you described a moment ago. Will stories like that have any impact on domestic political support for Erdogan, or at this point are people simply worrying about, whether they can buy bread, as we saw in the report?
It's of course hard to tell which factor has the effect on the declining support that I mentioned earlier, but it is a fact that the last 6 months, for sure, that there has been a steep decline in the polls of both the voting shares, but also the popularity ratings of the president. And there, my personal opinion is that a couple of factors are at play together, simultaneously are at play. I think one needs to think of the Turkish presidential system, but even before the transition into the presidential system, probably since 2013, the system as something that eats itself from within. And there are a couple of factors for that. First and foremost is, of course, the institutional collapse, degeneration, and presidential system, of course, plays a huge role in it. But at the same time, everyone focuses, rightfully so, on personalization of power and consolidation of power in the hands of the president. But there is a process that actually takes place together with that, and that has to do with the fragmentation of power within the ruling government today. And that has different dimensions. One is what I mentioned earlier, that these different elite groups demanding different things from the ruling government, and that is becoming really difficult to address these competing demands. But at the same time, you also see actually the ruling AKP and its junior partner, ultra-nationalist MHP, in competition with one another. So they stick to one another, but at the same time, they're also not that much in good terms with one another. So that, I think, in a way, influences the ways in which what I was mentioning earlier, this elite coherency. So we are not really talking about a very coherent ruling elite. And all of these, together with the economic crisis, the weakening economic crisis, I think it contributes to the ways in which citizens' constituencies perceive this governance deadlock, which, in my opinion, has been quite unprecedented. Even though Turkey had in its history governance deadlocks, I think this one is quite an unprecedented one, and that all of those contribute to the declining support.
Meanwhile, Bülent, we're actually seeing Erdogan attacking elites, attacking journalists, attacking intellectuals, attacking various public figures, even including a beloved pop singer who supposedly blasphemously sang about Adam and Eve 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. Is that having an impact on public opinion?
Well, yes and no. You mentioned that I just talked about if Erdogan is Islamist or not. Erdogan's fight with that singer is not about Islam, Adam and Eve. He always needs an enemy. To increase the polarization, he should attack someone. That's sometimes Germany. He calls that Germany again as a Nazi regime if he has a problem with Berlin. Or next day, if he has a problem with the U.S., he's accusing them being fascist, etc. So he always needs someone to attack to show his people that, you see, I'm the strong guy. So that's only the reason. That was the last person who was attacked was Sezen Aksu, the singer, and he used it against her. But just 1 week later, he understood that he made a mistake because every time, so when he gives a decision, he makes a poll for that decision. And he saw that attacking Sezen Aksu wasn't a good decision. And next week he said, just a minute, Sezen Aksu wasn't my target. I just said that people shouldn't insult the religious issues, etc. So when he makes mistakes, he tries to fix it, but it didn't work. People understood that he's just using it.
So all of you have described a president who is increasingly isolated. Erdogan appears to have backed himself into a corner abroad as well as at home. Having snubbed former allies, he is now looking around for new friends, as we heard, who can offer not only diplomatic but potentially also material material support.
November 2021. Crown Prince Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed of Abu Dhabi visits Ankara. He pledges investments worth $10 billion. For a long time, Turkey's relationship with the United Arab Emirates was characterized by hostility. President Erdogan had claimed the economic powerhouse helped fund the attempted coup against him in 2016. That all now appears to have been forgotten. The Turkish leader is also hoping for a new era in the tense relationship with Israel. In February, he plans to receive Israeli President Yitzhak Herzog. The gas pipeline through the Mediterranean, planned by Israel, Cyprus, and Greece, is likely to be a topic. Mr. Erdogan wants a say in the project. He also aims to establish new contacts with Saudi Arabia. Relations had been at a low point since 2018, when Saudi dissident Jamal Khashoggi was murdered inside the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. Erdogan immediately blamed the leadership in Riyadh. For some time now, however, he has remained silent on the matter. And he has now offered to mediate in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Can Erdogan lead Turkey out of isolation?
And let me put that question straight away to Christian. As mentioned, you said in your opening statement that Turkey remains a key player geopolitically. Can Erdogan use that to bring himself and Turkey out of isolation after having snubbed some very important allies?
Yes, he is in his presidential rule always able to reposition himself back, to anger the Western interests, but at the same time to show the West, you know, you need me, and I will stay a member of NATO. Yeah, he has been very strongly expressing his support for Ukraine. And to show, you know, I am part of NATO, you know, you can rely on me. And at the same time, he has joint interests with Ukraine, because Ukraine and Turkey together are facing Russian hegemony in the Black Sea region. Yeah, so there are joint interests between Ukraine and Turkey in that direction, and basically. Erdogan has three basic interests which are dominating his foreign policy. The one is what we're speaking about, that is the economic issue. But secondly, to hinder any possibilities that there is Kurdish autonomy or Kurdish statehood anywhere in Turkey or in Syria or in Iraq. And thirdly, he wants to have a stay and a strong stake in Cyprus and the Eastern Mediterranean. And here it seems that he is gaining more influence now. He has been isolated by Israel, Greece, Egypt, and the Emirates, what we've seen in the film. But now with pressure from the US, those countries include Turkey now into their so-called Eastern Mediterranean gas forum. Yeah? And so it is you have things of non-predictable, unpredictable actions of Erdogan. For example, suddenly he uses his drones and mercenaries in the Caucasus, that is against Western interests, when he supported Azerbaijan, or he is disturbing situations in Libya when he is sending mercenaries and drones to the western part of Libya. And thirdly, with Syria, it's a very risky policy there. You know.
And to what degree does the West, does NATO, does Europe need for Erdogan to stay in power simply because he keeps Turkey stable? You know that old quote that is often said about a U.S. president who referred to a certain Latin American dictator as he may be, and then he used a swear word, but he's our swear word.
No, Melinda. I think Europe and the US are looking beyond the era of Erdogan. They look into Turkey in its geostrategic and geo-economic position, and they are, in principle, hoping that this era will end as soon as possible with not too much frictions. You know, trying to deal with his attitude of foreign policy as long as possible, and hoping that there is a democratic transition as peaceful within the country as possible.
Bülent, geopolitical muscle flexing actually used to win support for Erdogan at home. Has that changed?
Well, it still works. I mean, he can use some international issues, some international conflicts to show his muscles in the interior politics. But when you have a financial crisis and when your own supporters are not still supporting you as powerful as before, it doesn't work. People, I mean, okay, if you say that I'm in Libya and I'm fighting against that and that, I mean, I'm working with Russia, buying missiles from Russia. You can show these people, but when people go home and they can't find bread in their refrigerator, that's a huge problem. Like, it's not just about the international politics. He used some Muslim steps, some Islamic steps, like opening Hagia Sophia, turning it into a mosque. It worked for a couple of months. But after a couple of months, people started to suffer again and again because of the economic crisis. So it just works for a couple of times. But then it doesn't work. The international issues, also the Islamic steps, they don't work.
So, Sinem, we've described a really bad economic crisis. You've described increasing authoritarianism at the same time. Our title asks, one man rule. Can Turkey survive Erdogan? What shape will Turkey be in a year from now?
I would like to rephrase the question a little bit and ask whether if Erdogan can survive Turkey.
And your answer?
Well, that's to be seen, but I think it's getting more and more likely that it will. And there, actually, I just want to go back to what you said when...
Super short, if you don't mind.
Yeah,
one sentence.
Okay. Super short. The thing is, I mean, because of a lot of different factors, given the history of democracy in Turkey in terms of electoral elections and so on, and also Turkey's increasing dependence on the West, I think it is highly likely that Turkey will survive Erdogan. What will come afterwards is another question.
Thank you. Thanks to all of you for being with us. See you soon.